Hi, guys, and welcome to American Government, the Government 320. We are going to have an exciting 8 weeks talking all about how governments work. Welcome to class. Just a few things before we get our lecture started. Make sure you watch those welcome videos, attend to all the week 1 requirements asked of you. Make sure you get in those discussions. And basically with class, we're really exploring this idea of why do we study government and what exactly does that mean to me as the individual, right? And so, in order to do that, we have to kind of go back to why governments were created in the first place, and that was to meet people's needs. And so, in this first part of the lecture here, we're going to talk a little bit about social cultural evolution, so we kind of get that basic foundation and understanding of just how government started and how they have grown and changed over time. And then in the second part of our lecture, we're going to talk about the beginning of American government and all the triumphs and tribulations that occurred there. All right. So, in our Module 1 overview, I'm not going to read this to you guys because if you're watching this video, I'm going to make the safe guess that you've already been into class. So, you've already looked over this. I wanted to start out with kind of thinking about these questions that our overview is asking us. And, most importantly, keep in mind that, the purpose of this class is to look at, that part that we play in government because we have gotten to a complexity in a society where, more resources, more institutions, more people. That means, more belief systems, more difference of opinions, more people trying to come together and work for the greater good. And then because we kind of have a tiered society, right? We're broken up into classes. We also see how, at times society doesn't seem very equal, right? It doesn't seem very equal, right? Because we seem to, because we've got that pyramid, so that little piece at the top seems to dictate what's going on for all the rest of us. So sometimes what I'm trying to say is that sometimes it makes it feel like government is this entity or the social institution that's like way up here and that all the rest of us are way down here, and there's really no way that we connect other than, every 4 years going to the polls and voting when, in reality, government is made up of people, and especially our American democratic government. It's we, the people of the United States, right? Even though, of course, our founding fathers, there wasn't a total equality in who they meant by we, the people, but we've evolved to a point in society and that we are more aware of our multiculturalism, and we are trying to find a new and improved ways that we can all work together and make everybody feel a little more equanimable. And a big part of government too is politics, and that's also, I think, a sphere of society that doesn't really seem like we as the individuals, the people down here at the bottom working in the middle class, working class people, so on. And, they seem separate too. But once again, there is a place for all of us in that. And none of those systems are going to work without any of us. So, that's a big part of just examining government and, why we should do it. And then, of course, why should we study government? Because in order for a society or a culture, a culture or a society, whatever you want to call it, a government, they are only as strong as its members. So it behooves the people at top in charge of nations, countries, to ensure that the members of their society are taken care of, are well educated, have good health care, and, are able to pursue, life, liberty, and what is it, the pursuits of happiness or prosperity. That's another good word for it too. Because, once again, if you don't have the people and the people's needs aren't being met, then, you're not going to have a good and strong government. And just like anything else that we set up socially as human beings, it's a system that's got to function, and it needs all of us working together for it to function. All right. So, starting out, of course, we're starting with the beginning of the American government, and of course, there's a lot of history behind that, and that we're not going to go into. So, we're just going to kind of pretend. We'll talk about this more in our second part of the lecture. But we're going to pretend we've gone through all of that: colonial exploration, colonialism. All the wars with the Indians and the other indigenous people on the American continent, and then, of course, fighting among the colonists themselves, the Brits with the French, and then, nobody liked the Spanish, and so all of that turmoil, tribulation. We have the French Revolution, and so just revolution is just the name of the game at this point in history. And so we see um, the early settlers to the country trying to break away from England and form something that is their own, something that is new. And so, very intellectually, they started with coming up with a list of guidelines, a list of rules, you can say, uh, uh, that they wanted the country to be founded upon. And so that's why we start this week, and we're really looking at the basis for our government, which is the Constitution and those bills of right in the Bill of Rights, excuse me. And because without those two documents, like I said, those are like our rule book, our guides on how uh, people agree to live together in this democracy and to keep this government going. And, there's a lot of good things in our Constitution and Bill of Rights. There's a lot of things that, and back in the 1700s, society has changed so much that they never would have thought about. You think, back in the 1700s, they couldn't conceptualize the internet, let alone to know something about like cybersecurity, or just that's actually the only example I can come up with. My brain's going a little numb here, but you guys get my point. Is that Constitution it's a great document that has led us to the point where we're at in society today. It's not perfect, but nothing in life is. But we all have to start with some basic foundation, and there's got to be rules at that foundation. Oh, I don't know why that doesn't show. I think I can move it. Hold on, guys. I'm trying to see if I can move that. So nope. It helped if I would have fixed the slide. Give me 2 seconds here. So all right, guys. Dang it. So, all right. So, just to end with what I just said, talking about that idea of having a basic foundation, having some kind of rules, some kind of guidelines to help maneuver, navigate the direction that you want that social arena that you're creating to go. Right. I hope this works. Moving off of this. All right, so we'll see how this looks. That leads us then to once again, let's go back. Oh, it's kind of hard to read, but oh wait, I know how to fix that. Leads us back to then just, looking at the beginning of governments, how they came about. And so that we call social cultural evolution. All right, guys, just bear with me. I know this slide's a little messed up. My apologies for that. So when we talk about the evolution of culture, the evolution of societies, we're talking about how cultures change and grow over time. And so when we put that in a model and we look at it, it seems to be that everything goes from simple to complex. We start out as sperm meets the egg, and then a zygote, and then neophont, and then trees start out as little seeds, and then they grow. Little acorn grows this humongous oak tree. That's just a system of evolution. It's just changing things, going from one thing to something else. It gets really complex though when we start adding those human variables into it because, as humans, we're a complicated species, right? And so when we're looking at the how, why, and the whens of culture changing, I just want to briefly talk about two of the main theories that we have on that: unilinear evolution and multicultural evolution. So, like I said, so government, culture, societies, those are all just different words for describing how groups of people come together and work together and live together and, survive and thrive together. And when we take a step back and we look at all of human history, we see that idea of simple to more complex. And of course, we know this from archaeological record. We know it from historical records, and so, it's important for us to have this basic foundation because, it tells us more about human behavior. And if anything, we're at least in this world to learn how to work together. I think, the main part of being human does mean that we need each other to survive. And it also means that, we care about each other. And sometimes that's not always reflected in our government because there are a lot of other variables that come into play. So, those seem to be more important than the individual at times, right? And that's another way that I think sometimes we feel a little disconnected from our governments or, from like the political arena. Because what really is politics, guys? Politics are the representation of government. And, just like anything in life, nobody's perfect. Nobody's always going to get it right. But I think we should at least be trying and, try to do just a little bit better than what we did before. So, yeah, so hope plays a big role in it too, right? So, all right. So, real quickly, so it seems that when it comes to humans grouping themselves together to work together and survive, we start out with those small kinship based systems. We call them bands. You can also look at that as families. Even now in modern society, we're in postmodern society. We all are, for the most part, the majority of us start out in our small family unit. And then what happens? We get socialized there. We get to a point to where we develop and we're ready to go out and mingle with the larger society, right? So that would be akin to then those tribal organizations. So that's when you still have your family, but you're still going out and you're interacting with other groups of families, right? And then and so that's you gotta look at it. That's the tribal organization, very communal, to where people they work together, they shared the resources, and no, basically nobody was in charge. So they didn't have those hierarchies, those class distinctions of, well, I'm at this position in society, so therefore that means I do more work than you, or my job is more valuable than your job, and therefore I should get more of the harvest this year. It's that kind of mentality. When you get to the tribal organization, you don't really have that. People do more sharing at that stage. And in anthropology history, we maybe romanticize tribal societies and chiefdom society, all of these societies when we, study them in our present perspective and we look in the ancient past, we tend to romanticize and we, seem to think that just because it was 10,000 years ago or 100,000 years ago, that somehow humans were different and we were more innocent and naive. And, we also see that with the beginning of contact and colonialism, where Europeans were going out and meeting these other cultures, and there were these romanticized and, very biased and racist ideas that these other groups of people were just children, they were savages, romanticized is a point that I'm trying to make. And it really wasn't like that because even in the past, even in a tribal organization where you have people working and sharing, not everybody is going to be on board. So, they have a check and balance set up to where if somebody is not pulling their weight, then, every culture has some kind of tactic to employ to motivate that person to pull their weight. And so, we see that we'll talk about communism real quickly here in just a couple minutes, but and I think that tribal organizations are a very simple form of communism, and the problem there with communism is a complexity, too many, way more people to have to organize, and that got turned into a type of dictatorial system of government. So we just finished talking about communism and capitalism in the Cold War in my history class last week. So that's definitely on my brain there. All right. So, like I said, so tribal organization, everybody's kind of, on an equal footing, sharing the resources, getting along. They've got their checks and balances. And then we get to chiefdoms. So then chiefdoms are the point in society to where, some group stood up and said, hey, yo, wait, now getting to a point that we are so big that we've got to start organizing better. So, what do we see at the chiefdom level? We see leadership emerging and we see specialization of labor. So, basically, what that means is you had one person, and with most chiefdoms, it was a kings and queens, just like over in Europe where they had the monarchies and feudalism. It was, it would be one individual or one small group of a family that pretty much controlled and were dominant over everybody else. Now, why? Why would people agree to something like that? Safety, protection, you know, um, having their needs met, right? I had to think of, chiefdom societies. That's like the beginning of the political arena. The person standing up, vote for me to be your chief. I'll give you more corn than you got last year. You guys know what I mean. So that's what. So my point is that's when we start seeing distinctions, class distinctions, and society getting to a point to where it's getting bigger but it's also getting more compartmentalized, right? All right. And then from those chiefdoms, like I said, then we see like feudalism and we have those monarchy systems. That is definitely what the founders of the American government were fighting against. That's what they wanted to change. Everybody was done with the feudalism in Europe. This small group of people having so much power and control over everybody else, and everybody else, basically starving and having just a poor quality of life. Is kind of what led not what kind of, but that was one of the leading reasons for why people wanted to get away from Europe and why they came here to America in the first place, right? So what do we see? So as we start getting more complex, we start compartmentalizing. That's hard to say, and so that we're creating those specializations, we're creating those divisions, and then once again, guys, humans are humans. I'm sure as all that process was being sorted out there in the beginning, they had to attend to human emotions and human characteristics too. So there was pettiness, there was jealousy, there were, all sorts of nefarious things going on. And so my point, and all sorts of nefarious things going on. And at the same time, not to make that all negative, there were all these wonderful things going on. Once we get to that chiefdom stage, societies start getting bigger. That's when we see writing emerging. So what does that mean? Education emerges. We see militaries, which has pros and cons, but militaries, in order to meet your people's needs, you have to protect them. So those were a beginning of one of the first tenets of a civilization. You got to be able to protect your people. You got to be able to protect your resources. You see and better forms of living, once we start getting more up to that state level. And then once we'll get into that maybe a little more, because we don't really see that until like the 18th or 1900s in America, because we have all these influence, well, not even until after the 1900s, really, probably about the 20s to 40s, because we had a mass flux of immigrants coming in, and so that forced America to redefine how they were building cities, and that's what brought about things like sanitation. And then, by the 50s, we have public health cares, and we have public education, and we have more social programs that have solidified us into a country. Oh, I just had an idea. See, I think that's why we still seem to be in such a tumultuous, conflictual state in our government, because in all actualities, we're still so young. I mean, I think I would argue that we really didn't start becoming a country until the 1950s. 'Cause that's when we really started figuring things out, and a little more of how to get people on board. That's interesting to think about. Think about that. We might talk about that a little more in class. And so after that chiefdom level, we get to that state level. So, that's where America started, the state level. And then, we have egalitarians, we have non egalitarians. I mean, you have oligarchies, and there are all sorts of different names for the complex governments at the state level, right? And so, And so we're unique in America because we are an egalitarian society, because we are democratic, yet we do have some class structure. Those class structures, though, aren't so limiting that we're not allotted social mobility. A good example would be the Hindu caste system. If you are at the bottom of the caste system, one of the unforgiven or unclean. I can't remember exactly the term, but if you're at the bottom of that totem, then that's where your class is going to prevent you from social mobility. Well, what does that mean? That means that you're not going to get the same opportunities as somebody in a higher class. You're not going to get, the health care, education, and those other great benefits that having a society allots to us, right? And so, America, we're not quite that rigid in our structure. Now, that's not to say that we have not been, because once again, we go back to the beginning, and that we, the people, it was a small group of, ex-Englishmen speaking for all the rest of us. And we know that, there were women, there were Indians, there were Asian people, there were Black people, there were all sorts of, the different cultures in America when it first started, just as much as we have cultural diversity today. And so at that point in our evolution, we were definitely more non egalitarian, because that class structure we had did limit a lot of social mobility to large group of people, right? All right, so I'm just reading here that next little paragraph there, and I think that I pretty much, I'm not going to read this word for word, guys. You guys can read it. I think I just did a good job of kind of giving us a painting a bigger picture of those ideas we're talking about there. Oh, but let me definitely talk about this. So basically, it does not matter what type of culture we have, what level of sociocultural evolution that stage is at. We're always going to have reciprocity, division of labor, and gender roles. And basically, to summarize that, that means that in order for a society slash government to work, you have to, it's a relationship. Everybody has to play a role in that relationship, and then everybody has to be doing something to contribute to keeping that relationship going, to contribute to keeping the machine running. So even in our personal lives, when we form relationships with other people, be that intimate partners, be it in our family, our work environment, our peer groups, our social organizations, those three factors are always going to be at work. So don't get caught up by that gender role thing. And that's just like I said, it's another way of saying that everybody has a place. And at the same time, it's also kind of acknowledging that we need everybody. It doesn't matter what the sex of the person is. We every life starts with male and female. Of course, you guys, I've got to go. So, of course, in my head, I'm thinking about this as in terms of goat eugenics and breeding goats. But you've got to have your doe, you got to have your buck, you got to have all those factors. You've got to have them working together, got to have everybody doing their job to successfully make baby goats. And I mean, I think that's a very simple way of saying that, those same factors are at play. If you want to make a government, you want to make a country, and you want it to function, right? Oh, and then just like I said, so just a little bit about archaeology there, because I did spend the first part of my career, my 20s and early 30s, doing archaeology, and so I really love that and history, and travel a lot around the country, and so being able to go and like see prehistoric places, or like go to DC and see or the cool stuff of the beginning of our governments, or going up to Massachusetts, or wherever, and seeing something. Oh, no, continue. you know it's all um it's all archaeology, in the sense that archaeology is about, it's definitely about taking into account the diversity within how we have grown and changed as humans, as cultures. But it's also, I think, you can apply archaeology to everything, because it's kind of like critical thinking. It's digging deeper to try to uncover the root of the matter, to get down to that root cause. And why? Because that makes us more informed, smarter individuals. And then the theory there is that that then is going to contribute to our ultimate health, well being, and happiness. And then, we achieve that. And of course, that's going to have effects on other people. So, when it comes to being human, it is very complex, right? Life is not all unicorns and rainbows. And I, for one, would not want to be in charge of the government, because we see how things, I'm sure, as stressful as life is for all of us. I know we all have our own stress in life. I really can't imagine what it would be like to be. I mean, I don't even know. We have millions, maybe even billions by now, people in the United States. I wouldn't want to be the one person at the top in charge of all of them. And I'll be a little radical and say that once you get to that level of complexity, and you have that many people you're trying to meet the needs of, it may not be a job for just one person. That's something interesting to think about, because I think that we have this Superman complex when it comes to leadership. If someone's going to step up into a leadership position, we then tend to idolize them as being super human, and we do that with politicians. We do that with artists. So that's a um, very interesting thing to think about as we look at our place in the government and, how the government influences us. Definitely what is our mindset? What are the rose colored glasses that we individually and collectively put on to those roles and those positions? All right, so that is multicultural evolution. And the reason that we call that one multicultural evolution because the stages aren't really as set as with unilinear evolution. Now, unilinear, that's the way most of us have been taught to think in Western society. You go in a straight line, A to B to C to D to da da da, all the way to Z, right? When life is not linear, life is uh life is spiraling, it's multifaceted. Think of like a scattergram with all the different points or a bell chart, and you've got those wave fluctuations. Oh, there you go. Just think of energy waves, or looking at sonar, and you've got that different stuff that you're seeing. Nothing's really ever a total straight line, right? So with those stages we just looked at, um and they're not as set. Yes, you go from simple to complex, but it is, but in that model, you can go from, say, being a tribe straight to a state. You can bypass that chiefdom state. And I guess I'm trying to think of a good example of a culture that might have done that. There might be, I mean, I would say maybe some European and maybe even some East Asian cultures. Japan's kind of what I'm thinking of because they seem to always like samurai and kind of always had a very dictatorial type state. Not really, I don't think I would call them a chiefdom society. So my point is, with multicultural evolution, there's some room for play in there. Now with unilinear evolution, it's very set. It's like you can't move up the stage until you have met these other criteria. There's not even like a, you know, flukes or mutations. Whereas with a multicultural evolution, that's what it'd be. If you were to skip one of those stages, it would kind of be like some kind of mutation, maybe accelerated growth there, right? So what we see with unilinear is there's a really heavy emphasis on that idea of division of labor and substance. And so, basically that's just what I was saying earlier, more more, putting everything in its own little box, I still can't say it, compartmentalization. And then what do we see there? We start to see more organized political and economic systems. And the greater the political and economic system gets within a society, the more influence it has on those social institutions and the social arena. That's kind of why we in America we have that separation of church and state, because then when you add that layer of belief systems and you try to use one set of belief systems and the religious sense to dictate a whole group of people, you really start running into problems, right? We know that we've seen that played out in our lifetimes. All right, so with unilinear evolution we have very simple. Hunter gatherer, pastoral. That's when they started using animals. Goats, by the way, were the first domesticated animal 10,000 years ago. Then we get to agriculture. And so this is when we see that change in division of labor because now you have animals to do a lot of the hard work. And then when you get to the point of mechanization, then you have machines doing the hard work for you. So, you could start to see how it's kind of like this argument debate people have about are robots, is AI going to eventually overcome the workforce to a point that no humans will be involved in that. I'm sure that's how they felt at the beginning of agriculture, and especially, like I said, mechanized agriculture. and where they didn't need as many people do it, out there picking the tobacco, picking the corn, or whatever they were harvesting, because now they had these machines. So now you have another problem of civilization, of government. What do you do with the people that don't? Not that don't want to work, well, that's another group too. Where do you get the motivation there? But what do you do with these people that have been displaced? How do you create some kind of specialization of labor to help them out and to make them a part of society? And so that's interesting, to think about how those ideas have changed over time. And then also, we're there at the beginning of agriculture, we're confused as to why we would even change to that. Hunting and gathering is a lot healthier lifestyle. It's in many ways less stressful, less lifestyle. And if anybody has a garden, anybody has animals, they know when you depend on those things every year for your, or every season for your food, and you don't get that, that really messes up your schedule. That really is going to affect your ability to survive. And so why did we turn to agriculture? And we really don't know, but we think that that not human, animal influence had something to do with it, just because being with the animals made it much easier to get the work done. And then at the same time, and just because they changed to agriculture, more dependent on one piece of land growing certain crops, they were still out foraging. You can't have a farm and still not kind of get that wild stuff that you don't grow too. So I think it wasn't like overnight we can't went to agriculture. I'm sure it was a process of time, just like anything else. And then once we got to that state level of cultural evolution, that's where we get to in industrialism, and basically that's when learn how to make consumer products that people would want to buy and pay money for. And so we learn how to monetize animals and plants. And that also in European culture and history goes way back to the Protestant Reformation. And we that culture was very religious and very focused on heaven and hell. And then with the Protestant Reformation, we had the Gutenberg press being invented. So people are becoming more educated. But there's also this turn to secularism. So people, instead of always worrying about, the fate of their souls, people started focusing on what they could do here and now in the present, right? And so, right now, of course, we are at that commerce level of society. We're like way blown past anything that Spencer and Morgan, who came up with these different stages of cultural evolution, ever probably would have imagined. And once again, I'm sure back in the 1700s, when they were writing the U.S. Constitution, they were forming the American government. They just could not conceive some of the ways that society has evolved and changed. And as humans, we have big imaginations and creativity is a big part of how we grow and how we get things to change. But I think even in our ingenuity and cleverness, there are things that 200 years from now, things will be going on that blow our minds. We're like, wow, I no clue that, even with all the great stuff and science fiction of things, of how technology is coming into this reality, there's still things that we have no clue about, right? So put yourself in the shoes 200 years ago of what this those group of guys were trying to accomplish. And I don't and once again, just like anything else, they were only human, only perfect, only as perfect as their time and their personalities will allow them to be, right? Just like all of us are. We all have our flaws and our good parts. So think about, those challenges that they had to undergo to start this system that we have, and then think about how that has changed, and then we're to bring us where we are right here at this present moment in society, and at this exact moment to where we are learning American government together. And we probably won't have the answers to everything by the end of this class, but I do think that we will all have a more expanded mindset. And if anything, I would hope that it would help us, that what you can take away from this class is that we learn to be more mindful of our thoughts, emotions, and actions, because at the end of the day, we all just have our own little bubble of existence that we live in, right? And the best that we can do to be as most positive and productive in our box of society, that does have influences on other parts of society. And we may never see the good things that we do in society. And that's okay too. You don't go out and do good things and be good to other people because you expect recognition and praise for it. That's a mental disorder, personality disorder there, actually. So, all right, guys, as I've been rambling, I'm pretty sure you guys have had taken a minute to just look over this chart, and we see of those, different stages of social cultural evolution, and don't get tripped up if you go back through all three of these slides, and you see those different names for the different stages there. Once again, it's all different ways of saying the same thing. And basically with this chart, I like this chart a lot because I think it's a really concise and comprehensive um, mm, overview of those different stages. And, like I said, we're in that post modern stage of social cultural evolution. And it'll certainly be interesting to see what comes after that. So, all right. So, this is just for a little fun because I really like this picture. Let me X out of here because I want you guys to be able to see the whole thing here. So, when communism, capitalism first came about, okay, that is the whole picture. I was just making sure. First came about, actually, I think I am missing something here. So, when it first came about, it really was this idea of, you got to think about it. We were colonialism, imperialism. These little European cultures were in charge of all these resources and all these other people in these foreign areas. And basically, those indigenous people were just slaves. And so the beginning of capitalism was colonialism to and the majority of the world who were living under the colonial system. That is what capitalism, that's what it looked like to them. It was them slave to the system working their little butts off while some fat cat got rich, right? We will actually see America, the Gilded Age, there in the early 1900s. We go through an evolution, or maybe a enactment. That's a good way to say it. This idea of capitalism gets played out then, and I have to ask myself is how much of our American government still kind of reflects this idea of capitalism. We want to move to these ideas of free market and more free trade, but looking at how that all plays out and how that is all distributed. Oh, there's a good point. So governments were set up to meet people's needs, take care of people, and help distribute those resources. That's a part of that reciprocity exchange system I was talking about earlier. And even that division of labor and gender role there is distribution of the wealth. And that's something that has that's a question we've been talking about since the beginning of colonialism and since the beginning of trade, back in the even Columbus founded America back in the late 13 early 1400s when Europe first discovered the the tip of Africa there at Cape Cod, and then went on, kept going east, and discovered the Spice Islands and that whole part of the world before, and coming over and discovering the whole western part of the world, right? So my point there is trade. That's a big part of governments too, and keeping governments together is you have to have a system of trade. That is one of the reasons why when we look at global relations, there's some conflict going on there. And I believe, not believe, oh wow, that I was almost going to sound really pompous there, but I do not believe, but I think that some of that, just has to do with how trade was established from the beginning. And I won't that history lecture, but trade has been the first world war that we had. Trade routes played a big part in that. And so why? Break that down real simply. Well, resources, getting access to resources, making sure your people are taken care of. But to go to a whole, to just say, if I can't have it, I'm going to just, nobody else can have it, destroy everything. That's a weird mentality to have too. And, that's what we see in the Cold War. It's kind of this idea of side with our government or side with our government, and if we can't have all the toys, then we're gonna hit that button and blow you up. And in actuality, that was kind of propaganda. United States, Soviet Union, they know that nobody wins if we would ever have nuclear. Nobody wins in that scenario, right? I guess unless they're all out on their space stations in outer space, ready to colonize Mars or something. But I don't know. That seems a little far fetched too, huh? So anyway, so my point is, so what we see at the beginning of capitalism is that it's more colonialism. It's just that slave system that so much of the world had been living in. So we see then, so when you look at it from that perspective, you see then how this idea of communism appealed to so many people. Real quickly in Vietnam, the French were still trying to keep them colonized. They didn't want those people to have freedom, even though they brought education, better system of living, and came with the price. You want someone to come into your house and say, okay, I own it all now. And if you want it, you have to do what I say. No, that's why we live in America, a free country, right? Because nobody can tell us what to do with our stuff. So you got to put yourself in the shoes of other people of like, oh, they're trying to, let's come over here, take all our stuff, beat us, rape our women, burn our house down, kick our dogs, and we're supposed to comply and be happy with it. No, people were looking more to communism because it was more of the tribalism that we talked about a few minutes ago. It was that system. Everybody's contributing to the machine there. You see that? The machine's operating and everybody's happy. Why? Distribution. Because, what you're putting in to make that machine running, you're getting the rewards from. It's actually going back to you and not to that fat cat. Now, this is an historical view of what capitalism and communism are, and since the Cold War, because we're still kind of post Cold War, very early in the stages of getting over the Cold War era, and we see capitalism and communism changing, and we've also seen new systems of government coming up, right? Socialism. I know that that's not popular in America. We talked about that in my American history class, but socialism, I seems to be the evolution of capitalism and communism. It's like trying to take the best of both of those and create a new type of system, a new type of government. And of course, just like when our founding fathers started America, they had conflict. They were trying to start a new kind of government by taking and picking from all the old types of governments they knew about. Now, I don't say that to be like socialism is going to be the next big thing everybody goes to, but I think that it's a good working model to get our brains running to think about how we can, up that stage and how we and grow and change again because, our populations are getting larger and we do need more of those resources. So, once again, government started to take care of their members. What does that give us? That gives us specialization of labor, that gives us social institutions, education, army for protection. And those social institutions come in the forms of, you know, having our systems of transportation and travel taken care of, feasibly basic health needs being taken care of, having our family groups, having our social groups, having our religious groups, those are all social institutions that governments play a role in keeping safe. Yet, there's our first con I actually didn't write down, but the con in that is how much should that government, which is ultimately just a social institution, play in our individual lives? Ah, see, that does Big Brother need to control us in every part of our life? Or, does there need to be a balance, kind of like the federal and state governments have? If there's a balance there, then, there needs to be a balance between the individual and the government. And that does come in the form of the types of rights and the types of freedoms that we are given or we have taken away from us. So I feel like I'm getting a little, I'm going to go off on some little anarchy radical kick here. But my point is that, and thinking about the role that we play in government, we also want to think about that role that big government plays in our life because, how much of your freedom are you going to sacrifice? How much of your stuff are you going to give up just so some big fat cat can reap all the rewards of it? So I hope that what I'm saying is making sense to you guys because I'm not trying to sway anybody to be like this version is right or this version is right. I'm just trying to step back and give us a bigger picture and kind of help us see different perspectives and how different people and different groups think because all of that plays a role in how we live our lives and how we work together in the American government. So that's when we get those cons. Like I said, how much control and influence, or how much control over our individual lives and freedoms should the government have? How much of that do they propagandize to us in the form of safety and protection? Oh, those are good things to think about too. That's definitely in the past 10, 20 years have been very prominent points in the world we live in, right? Safety, protection, which, now you guys understand a little more why those are such political hot points because they're appealing to this original meaning of government. But once again, it's gotten so complex that there are also personal and nefarious agendas going on too. So, tricky balance there, right? And then you have things like social institutions. I use religion as the example there. Religion can manipulate and cause fear. So can any social institution. You can have toxic work groups. You can have toxic religious groups. You have social institutions that exclude members. That creates in groups and out groups. And then, so at the end of the day, the role of government is how do you make everybody happy? And you're not going to, but there's got to be some balance. It just can't be all the majority rules, and we just can't cater to minorities. There has to be some kind of common ground there. And when you have class distinctions, that adds another layer of complexity because now you have classes and you have to look at the majority and the minority in them and then you look at equal representation. That was a big thing at the beginning of our government. We had to have equal representation. Why? To provide for general welfare, to maintain social order. So once again, in our exploration of American government in this class, those are the main things that we are challenged to think about. Those primary purposes of government, that general welfare, that social order, and then what is your role in all of that? And like I said, what is our role to the point of how complacent do we want to be with allowing government to control us? I guess if that's the word I've been trying to avoid saying, because as human beings, we want to be free to pursue our own destinies. We don't want to be controlled. And yet at the same time, we do not exist in isolation, and we can't be all sadistic and hedonistic. So there's got to be, and because we don't exist in isolation, we have to agree upon that social sphere. That social sphere is our playground. That's where we go out and we interact with others. And we can't go out into that playground and be all bullies or, that's extreme. So the other extreme, you can't go out and be a total introvert or agoraphobic and never leave your house. And if you guys know what I mean, there's got to be balance. And, a key part of governments and in taking care of its members, that last question I just had of how do you make everybody happy, you know, along those lines, I would put psychology in there and say it's more like how do you motivate? We have what, 8 billion people, I guess, last count I heard of people in the world. How do you find one thing that is going to motivate all 8 billion people on this planet? All right, maybe that's a little too complex. Let's break it down. In the town you live in, let's say you live in a town has a population of 34 million people. What is the motivation that's going to keep all 34 million people, you know, trying to pursue the good life and, trying to keep those negative personalities that just want to run amok and destroy everything? How do you find the motivation to get everybody on the same page? Well, laws, of course, laws, ethics are good ways to do that. But when you have to do that on those larger scales as governments, that's then where you do policies, laws, policies, most definitely. And so that's when we start getting into the political sphere of government. So politics, this is such a great definition, is the activity by which an issue is agitated or settled. And I would go so far as to say that it seems, we've gotten to a point in political evolution that it seems more agitated than it does settlable. I mean, I do believe that our political arena, we need to get away from this bipartisan thing. We need, people in politics have got to figure out a better way to come together and to stop arguing each other because, frankly, it creates a bad precedent for not only not in the foreign global sphere of how other people look at us. It sets a bad precedent for us as American citizens. It sets a bad precedent, the next generation, our children and their children, when they see these people on TV who are in positions of power arguing and fighting with each other like 2-year-olds, what kind of example is that setting for our children? What's the motivation there for them to want to grow up and try to do something good? So just something to think about there, right? All right. And so a lot of that, once again, we keep saying motivation, control, power. That is definitely a big part of making a government. There has to be some kind of power. There has to be motivation to get people to agree to play together on the playground and play together amicably and fairly and in ways that's not causing harm, right? Well, as human beings, we don't like to be controlled and we don't like to be told what to do. And we always think we're right. So when you put us all together on that playground, you see how there has to be some kind of structure. Once again, constitutions in general set the rules of the playground. But, rules don't do any good if there isn't anybody enforcing them. So that's where authority comes into play. Authority is what keeps us motivated and keeps us all on the same page. Haha, but because we're human and nothing is black and white, and I think that as humans, we like to shake it up, right? Then we have politics. So politics is the one that is dictating the power and authority. And so that's then once again, we go right back into that gray area of, okay, well, how do we motivate all these different groups of people? You know, so you see, protests, healthcare crisis, the politics with all of those, what's influencing our government in responding to those issues. If governments are made up of the people, we need to get away from looking at social institutions as representing people and figure out more of a way to get people to represent people. Does that make any sense? I'll let you guys um, come to your own conclusions on what you think that means to you, because I think in exploring that idea, that's directly going to relate to what is your role, my role as the individual in the government. I already know I'm lucky. My role is to help educate people. And I'm very happy with that role. I don't want to have all the answers or solutions. I just want to do the best I can, live the best life I can, and, help as many other people as I can. So, when it comes to those next social leaders, it's all of you guys. You're the Gandhis and the Martin Luther Kings and the Nelson Mandelas and the Jane Goodalls and the Susan B. Anthony and name it, Georgian Truce, name the famous person that did something good that you would want to emulate in your life and try to follow their legacy, because it's up to us as the individuals and to set those to be that positive agent of social change and set those positive precedences. And we just got to find that way to have, find that way to create more of that balance with those political and kind of higher spheres of society. Okay, so we need that. We need the rules. We need people or some type of authority, power to enforce those rules. So those are some, but that's like step one, step two, step three of how do you go about setting up a government? How do you go about setting a government that's going to be a democracy? Now, the founding fathers weren't totally ignorant. Like I said, they picked and choose from the examples and systems that they had available to them up to that time. So a lot of the American our ideas of democracy and even how our old government is set up is based on the ancient Greeks and particularly Plato's idea. So if anybody has ever read The Republic, that'll I don't like Plato. He's probably one of the most narcissistic people that ever existed. And trust me, I've read lots of his work, and I don't dig any of it. It's all very elitist and classist and excluding, and basically Plato thought that he was smart and he was a part of the very small group of human beings that existed that weren't as smart, and pretty much the rest of us were all just dumbasses. And that's why they had slavery in ancient Greece, and that's why that doesn't excuse it, but because we were modeling ancient Greece and those ideas expounded during that time period, 500-600 years even before America, right? That it's easy to see how some of the same problems still existed. So, slavery women being second class citizens and, classes and all that good stuff. But anyway, that's kind of a ancient Greek history. Haha, no pun intended. And that we're not gonna too deep into, remember, because we're just beginning our basic understanding. And so we just want that basic simple foundation. So we're like, well, how did they know, to do the democracy like this, or to make it this way, or how did they legitimize our American democracy? And you have to follow examples, of course. And then, a big way that American democracy was legitimized goes back to, once again, one of those beginnings of government, a strong military. When you can, by defeating England, we made ourselves a power to be, we were contenders then. And trade had a lot to do with it too. Once America then was now in control of the colonies and the trade goods and their distribution and that reciprocity there, then people didn't have to go through England. And of course, that you give people um, it's not the word reparations. Oh, I can't think of what that word is. Like favors, incentives. That's still not, there's a specific political word there. Incentives is good enough. Incentives is close enough. But then, America could go to France and say, hey, France, we'll send you this tobacco and we'll do it for 5% less than, England was doing it when they got it from us. And, that's a whole bunch of government. But that's actually economics and commerce. And yeah, I don't have a lot of experience in any of that. But, my point there is to legitimize yourself, have to have a military. You have to have that system of government, those rules that your members are all going to agree to set up. And then you have to get that trade going with others. And so we see that. That's how America began legitimizing itself. And once again, to go add back to my earlier point about how I think America ultimately as a country and government is still in its infancies, because it wasn't really until the 1950s we started coming together. I think, when did American government really become legitimate? The 1940s, War II. And then what happened? We jumped straight into the Cold War with Russia to establish ourselves as a dominant power. And now here we are 60 years later. And in many ways, we have achieved that goal, but in many ways, we still have a long way to go. Oh, wow. I can't remember what the final assignment in this class is, guys, but maybe somebody might want to explore, and somebody want to research that idea that America is still in its infancy despite our history. That I think would be definitely an interesting read, interesting rabbit hole there. All right. So when it comes to democracy, there actually are different types. We'll go over different types. We'll go over that here in just a second. But basically a democracy, it's the rule of the many, and dot dot dot, that's just part of it. But it's the rule of the many, dot dot dot, and can be obfuscated by a few, or like it ultimately, we're going to listen to what everybody says, but me and my buddies over here are in charge, and we're going to be the deciding factor. So democracy does come in many forms. And, of course, in our society, in America, our actuation, idea, theory of democracy is we the people, right? Our government exists because of us and because of our contributions to making it exist. Yet, once again, everything's not all black and white, so it's more complicated than that, because, more complex society, we've got more specialization of labor. And then what does that mean too? That also means that we get groups of people. So, those are groups that are ultimately shaping the government and policy making. You know, those interest groups, those voters, political parties, corporation. And I'm just going to go ahead and say it, guys. But the sad thing, when we look at this group, who's the minority that mostly doesn't get considered in any of the shaping and policy making? The voters, interest groups, political parties, and corporations all have the money to force their agendas and to see things go the way they want it to go. And sadly, as voters, we are we're so far down that totem pole, guys. That totem pole, we are like down in the ground beneath the support holding the totem pole up in many ways. But once again, you know, everything is not black and white. It's not all doom and gloom. Even as, you know, being the minority among the groups that are shaping policy making, there are still ways that we can have voice heard. There are ways that we as individuals can come together and form our own groups and get things passed. When I worked with the Native American, we accomplished getting a new law added to the state of Alabama. And there were no, this is oh gosh, let me think, guys. 2010, somewhere 2006 to like 2010, sometime during that time period is when I was doing that work. And basically, before then in Alabama, there were no laws to protect prehistoric sites. Now, if you know anything, especially about the southeastern part of the United States, there it's not uncommon to find you know, prehistoric Native American artifacts, sites, bodies, and not bodies as you know bodies, but bone fragments, bone remains, and there were no laws protecting those. So you know there are laws for selling artifacts. There are laws for selling human remains. There's laws for transporting human remains past state lines. There's laws for transporting artifacts and selling them in other states, but there were no laws to protect those resources up, you know, to that point. So people could just go out and loot and pot hunt, and you know that was not much justice or equanimity for the Native American people and their descendants that live here and are part of our American system and government too, right? And so, yeah, so long story short, there, let me end the story. We did work to get a law changed so that there was more protection over prehistoric sites and prehistoric artifacts. So, you know, small victory, guys. That was a small victory, but you know what? That meant so much to the Native American people. And then me, I'm not Native American, but it meant a lot to me too, because in my mind, it showed me as a young, in my young, late, you know, late 20s, early 30s, a woman that and people can come together and we can work for a common good to you know, make life better for everybody. Because you know, in archaeology, the reason I love archaeology, I love history, I love talking about things like government, is because it's all about people. And while I like psychology, all about people. I love learning about people, and I really do, you know, think that none of us can be the same. You know, you just have to go. Here we go, back to eugenics. I'll go back to goat eugenics here to keep it all PC. Go back to goat eugenics. You know, you can't have the same goats breeding each other every year. You can't have a doe have a buckling, and then that buckling is going to impregnate his mother, impregnate his sister, impregnate the babies that come about. You're going to end up with some bad genes. You're going to end up with some inbreeding. It's the same thing as humans. The reason why we are all different and unique is because we all have special gifts to give to society. And, you know, life is not black and white, it's not monochrome, it's a spectrum, and it's a very diverse and colorful spectrum. And I think that's just something we see reflected in human personality. So, you know, when if we watch a lot of social media, we watch a lot of like news on TV, listen to like radio shows, or I know you kids call them podcasts now. They're still radio shows to me, but you listen to those, and there's so many that just seem like they just thrive on conflict and keeping everybody stirred up and angry. And then you have others that are really Pollyanna and life is unicorns and rainbows. And then you have those groups in the middle that give you different types of perspectives too. And so I'm the type of person, I'm intrigued by human behavior and the things that we do. So I like to inform myself by looking at all sides and every part of an issue. And I just see humans and our behaviors and our personalities as the same thing. We're all different because we need to be, we must be, or else we're not going to get along and survive. It's just, there are a lot of small little dots and points all in between that we've got to figure out how to work out. And I think it does. And so, the biggest part of policy making definitely comes down to agendas. And personally, I think that's where government's messed up. Once they started pulling in political agendas, that's when it made it a lot easier to abuse power and authority. And I actually have a video at the very end. I think it might be the end of the second lecture here, guys. I'm trying to wrap this up. I know we're running long, and I think we're already over an hour. But all right. So once again, political agendas. What are they, and what do they influence? Well, they influence the way our countries ran. They influence the way that we're able to go out and navigate and exist in society. So there are shared values, and there are customs, traditions, and then events that are going on, and then we have terms of debate. So that goes back. That's just some political talk for saying that there are these underwritten rules of political rhetoric and a lot of fallacies, double speech, and things of that nature that are involved in the political agendas and the political playing fields. And so, the players in that arena, they understand what those things mean. And so, there definitely is an art to debate and an art to politics. And just once again, I think we've gotten a little stagnant, I think, in our arenas, and we've got to find a way to change to something else. It's just, I don't know what that's supposed to be. All right, so there's a question. There's our $1 million question. So, in everything that we've just talked about and briefly touching on this idea of political agenda, I want us to think about and if you guys think about it and think you have a whatever answer you come up with, let's try to remember to maybe share about this in the discussions this week. So, and learning about American government together in our safe space here in this classroom. What is our political agenda? What do you think that is now, and how do you think that will change by the end of class? Yeah, you guys help me to help you remember this question. So when we do get to the end of class, we can hopefully come back full circle and think about that, and might not even change at all. So, all right. So, real quickly, we already talked about this. So, we know that our government was based on the ancient Greek. And then to go along with our social cultural evolution, when we look at the evolution of democratic governments, we see the autocracies, oligarchies, and the democracies there. And so it gives you time to read the definition of those. And so just, to get a little nerdy here, we're just going to to get into the etymology of what democracy means. So we break it down, and we know it's common people power, and demos kratos. So once again, the common people have power, and the Greeks didn't like democracy for all the reasons I just told you. They wanted the small group in control. They didn't want the common people they thought were stupid to be the ones in charge, And I say that very sarcastically because, like I said, I don't like Plato, and so I feel I have the right to say it that way. And then, another reason they failed the democracy was because of oh, I'm going to butcher that word. Demigog, demagogies. I believe that's how you say that. And basically, that's just, oh, it's so funny. It's so ironic. It's like, the demagogy where, the common people then end up being the ones that take over and have all the power and control. And then we're all going to develop these God complexes and blah, 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 blah. But that's I think we might see some elements and some of the people that go into politics and in governments, there might be a little bit of a God complex involved there. But for the most part, you know, our government is about for the people and figuring out how to meet all of our and bring together our differences into some kind of cohesive form, right? So we know that democracy is a form of government. It's something that requires processes. So that's the procedural view. So you're looking at the process of who gets to be involved. What are the rules and the consensus there? What is the power? And that's basically what political equality, we're looking at the power and control factors involved. And, and there you go. It comes down to us as the individual. We have power when it comes to voting, and there's a lot of political inequality there. We'll get to that eventually. We already started talking about that a little bit in the discussions this week. And so there you go. So procedural democracy. You need people participating. That sounds like division of labor, gender roles, specialization. You need political equality. Well, that sounds like reciprocity and gender roles and division of labor. Majority rule, that one's hard because, once again, we need everybody on the same page, everybody playing together in the playground nicely. Yet, not everybody is always going to get along and agree. So, how do you find that balance between the majority rule and the minorities not feeling like they haven't been listened to? So that's the tricky rule that the government has. Once again, how do you appeal and make everybody happy? You're not. You can't. So how then do you find the middle ground? And that's where we're at. That middle ground. We have the rules, we have the playing field, we have the theories, we have the different spheres. I just, we're still trying to put them all together. And I tell my history class that a lot when we're looking at decolonialism and other cultures, and some of the, like for instance in the Middle East, all those wars and fighting we were having with them, that had a lot to do with the Cold War ending, and those nations, just not that they're primitive and as in they're more stupid than other cultures, but they had just come from this history of having other people rule them and being oppressed. And so they're still in the stage of trying to figure out their way forward. And so a lot of conflict has to do with that. See a lot of conflict in the continent of Africa, kind of those same ideas. Not that those cultures are any less capable than we are, But when you live for one way for so long and then you move into another way, there is going to be some chaos in picking up and rebuilding those pieces because you don't want to rebuild the same thing, right? And so, yeah, as I'm going through and I keep doing this lecture, I'm furthering my idea there and be like, yeah, I still think, and as America, we're just like that too. I was being really biased in the past by always just talking about the other cultures. We're there too. It just doesn't seem like it because we're us and they're them. Oh, there we go. Human behavior. We create the in groups and out groups. Anyway, let's pull this back into American government, right? So once again, so when you're trying to create a government, you have to have those theories. You have to have substance because you have to have be able to enforce those theories and those rules. And at the same time, you have to protect the people that are part of that government because if you don't protect the people, you're not gonna have a government. And then, in the history of American government, we have gotten to a point to where we have very narrow views. I don't care if you're conservative, liberative, I don't care what you are. Some way, just by saying I'm a conservative, I'm a liberal, you are already narrowing yourself and buying yourself and putting yourself in one little box and not really coming out of that. I'm not gonna. I'm the type of person I listen to everybody and listen to all sides. I will listen to Alec Jones, Glenn Beck, and turn around and listen to NPR. I like to have that full view and to be as informed as I can. And because I feel like when you can get all the different views and see how everybody thinks, that does mean that's the psychologist in me. That gives you some kind of common ground to be able to come together. Guys, I live in Tennessee, and when it comes to politics and governments, I'm probably in a minority group. I'm not going to tell you guys which minority that is. It's not liberal Democrats. I'll at least tell you. I'll give you guys that much. Okay, I'm probably a little more out there than that. It's not Tea Party either or libertarians, okay? I'm more like Green Party. I'll vote for the Native Americans type people because I believe more tribal type. But anyway, none of that has anything to do with what we're going to learn about in class, what I'm going to share about in class. My point for sharing that with you guys is that I live in Tennessee where a lot of my opinions are not the majority or popular opinion. Therefore, basically everybody that I have as a friend around here is a very extreme conservative. And you know what, guys? We all get along. Even even when we talk about politics, nobody gets mad. We find a way to kind of, come together, laugh it off, and keep moving forward and keep being friends. We don't care what what or whom one votes for because at the end of the day, we have the same basic values. We believe about being good to other people. We believe about caring for other people. We believe in trying to do the best you can. So, we don't let our religion and our religious or political difference interfere with our friendships. So there you go. So there's my second example, along with changing the law in Alabama for prehistoric sites. There's my second example of how we can get along with our differences. A lot of problems with us as human beings is we let our narcissism, we always call that ego, but it's not quite what it is. It's more narcissism. It's, selfishness and all these negative characteristics that we have that some people have developed in life that can prevent us from moving forward. And hey, even those of us that think we're good people, we get along with everybody. We have bad days too, guys. Not sitting here on a soapbox like I'm better than anybody else. Trust me, I'm not. I'm very imperfect and probably more wrong than I am right. Okay. So once again, we've got to find a way to bring all these different parts together. And then, even more so, what I want to point out here is that balance of those minority and majority interests. we also think about we also have to think about things like minority and majority rights. And those minority rights are not less important. In fact, the minority rights may be the most important rights that we have, because now we're seeing this word. This As humans, we're so funny with our words, right? And one word can mean so many different things, and it can have positive and negative connotations. You know, minority rights in politics means that you're the small group, you're the one that nobody's going to listen to because majority rules, right? But then at the same time, what's the etiology of minority? The individual. The individual, you as a human being living and existing at this time, you have basic rights that nobody, no government can ever take away from you. That's the right to anonymity. That's the right to sovereignty. Excuse me. That's the right to not be physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually violated by other people. That's the right to kind of believe or follow whatever philosophy you want. Those are things that we because we are alive always have, and we can never let any governments or any individual ever take those away from us. And so there we go once again, that balance of governments, taking care of people's needs, and how much of our minority rights are we going to give up for our government to take care of us? That is a question I definitely cannot answer for you. Do we, do you live in a world where you're scared and safe and you just want your government to take care of you, so then you really have no accountability or responsibility for your actions? Or do you want to live in a dynamic world to where you're experiencing life and you're part of that process, and not just in those negative ways, but you're actually living life, because that is why we are all here and exist in this world. We're all here to live our life. And of course that gets complicated too. You throw Buddhist spin on it, and it's like, well, even are the rapee and the rapist, and that's, we won't get into that. That's some philosophy there, right? So, all right, guys, we're almost done with this lecture. So, I know it's a lot of heavy information that we have been talking about, a lot of different things for us to think about. But real quickly, want to talk about the four top parts of politics. So you have those majoritarian, interest groups, client, on, trooper, and neural. So back to that one slide when we were looking at, of the policy making process. So, these are the four, I guess you could say, main theories of like political thought, of that political process, and things like, how the laws are made, how policies are made and enacted, and then, how going to respond, I guess you can say, as members of that. And so, I think what we can see is, once again, this idea of majority and groups seem to have more influence than minorities. And so, that is definitely a that's definitely a puzzle, and how the pieces are going to fall. I don't know. In many ways, our government does have some great things that mitigate that balance. That we have things that keep us safe personally, and then, we have the federal government that enacts things that we need. We have that check and balance system. But then at the same time, there's so many things that are wrong, and so many things that can be improved upon, that I think time. I think that's probably the answer, and that might be the only answer we can ever come up with, is that, you know, time will tell. And once again, we just got to keep trying, keep pushing forward, and, hoping for things to work out. That's what I would say would be the main thing that sets human beings apart. animals and life forms on this planet is we do have hope. Goats, they don't have hope. They don't understand what that is. They live in the now, in the present. They don't sit out there in the field and go, I hope she brings us some food. They're like, yeah, she'll bring us food. And she brings us food, it's time. If not, we'll scream and yell and she'll come out here. But as human beings, we're more complicated than that, right? We've got to find um, better ways to exist and get along with each other. So, just a couple difference here between direct democracy, representative democracy. This really relates to our discussion this week. Because we're not a direct government, we're not a representational government. Oh, I'm so we're almost finished with the lecture, guys. We're kind of, well, actually, we're kind of more one than we were the other. And one of the challenges this week is to kind of ask ourselves, why did our founding fathers not want to make us a direct democracy? And that of course has a lot to do with George Washington and his role as being the first president. They felt like so. Long story short, direct democracy. I think there in the beginning stages that felt more like it was going to be a monarchy or like an oligarchy. The representative democracy jibed more with their ideas of wanting to be this new thing and wanting to be independent and sovereign that came before. And just like I think we have been talking throughout this whole lecture, not every part of American government or the American political culture is perfect. Of course, nothing in life is. There's always going to be multiple ways to look at it. I think where our political system gets where I said where it's a little stagnant is it's too caught up in that black and white thinking, and we really need to expand more out and look at the full spectrum of life, and definitely, nothing ever gets accomplished when you just sit around and all day. And I'm sure you guys know what I'm talking about. You have family members, you have coworkers, you have people in your life that happens at the end of the day, they are always going to want to argue with you and everybody else. They would argue with the sun if they see it. You know what I mean? And that's our job in that is at the end of the day, we got to find a way to be okay with that because do we want to end up being that type of person who's always miserable and we're all miserable, right? But we want to be the type of people that seem to make it our objective to make other people miserable? No, of course not. And I'm sure in many ways, people with those types of personality disorders, they don't really want that either. They just they don't know another way. And there you go, incentive and motivation. What's the motivation to get somebody to stop being a contrary argumentative type of person? What's the motivation to get somebody to stop being melodramatic? It's hard to say. And that's why we have the field of psychology so that we can try to figure that out a little more equanimously. Yeah. So governments definitely, we talk about that idea of equality and liberty because remember, guys, it does not matter. I'll stand by what I just said. Minority rights, your right to be here and live in this world and pursue your happiness without infringing upon anybody else or anybody else infringing upon you. That is gift. When you came into this world and the fairy godmothers came and gave you your gifts, they gave us all that gift. We have the gift to live and to exist. And there is no other person, no other social, governmental, religious, whatever type of institution that can take that away from us. And that's the scary thing about living in this world, right? Is that there are factors that will seek to take that away from us. That's why, human trafficking is the number one black market economic endeavor above even illegal drugs and illegal guns. Actually, it's human trafficking, guns, and then drugs. And so that's kind of scary to think about, you know. And also, because I always feel like I go like real dark and I don't want to. I just, once again, trying to point out things and make these connections just so we have a little wider, expanded mindset of looking at these issues is that, and looking at these issues is that, as much as things can seem contrary and at odds, and there are horrible, miserable things that happen in society, there really are a lot of great things that happen too. And, let me use my nonprofit where we rescue animals and we create a safe space for healing, and all these other nonprofits that work with groups and work to help other people, animals, nature, whatever it is. There are a lot of people out there doing good things in this world. The problem there, or I think what the problem is, it's not a problem, but you guys will get my point. The problem there is that we don't hear a lot about that. As humans, we kind of like to focus more on the macabre and the shocking, negative things in life. And so we don't really focus as much on those good things. And then at the same time, altruism, I think, is why we don't hear more about those good things, because altruism, to be a good person and to do good things and to help others, don't do it for the recognition. You don't stand up and go, look at me, look what I did. I'm so great. Because then you're getting into a personality disorder, to be truly Freudian slip there. Yeah, you're getting into narcissism. And to be truly uh, um, altruistic, it doesn't matter if, you go out and you do what you do. And if you never get any praise for it, that's perfectly fine because, there you go. Are you doing it to be a good person? Or are you doing it for the recognition, And we see how that gets complicated when you start a complex society and larger groups of people, because then that's when we get into order and stability, right? And how those come into contact with our individual liberty, as we have on the slide. And once again, that's that individual liberty, that's our innate right to life, because we are here in this world, okay? And so that once again is where tricky part of the government too. How just, governments are here to protect us, but just how much control does Big Brother really have over my individual liberty? Oh man, and that I could probably sit here for another hour and talk about that. So we won't. So I just thinking about this, just look at those questions, and once again, think about, how those questions relate to what we're learning about this week, what we're talking about in this lecture, and then, once again, how it relates to you and I as individuals. Okay. And though, here we go once again. So, in order to create those basic workings of a government, what did we say they are? We need a set of rules. We need a place to enact those rules. We need people and authority that are overseeing the enactment, the playing out of those rules, right? And then once again, that's when we get back into that idea of, do we want to live in a big brother state? Do we want to live in a state of anarchy? Or do we want to live somewhere in between? Even though as humans we like to go to extremes, I really think that most people, most people, as in all of us, really want to just live a life happy, take care of what they got, and not cause any harm to others, not have others cause harm to them. And so there is a certain part of that we expect our governments to do for us, and that's our governments at any level, right? State, local. That's why we all have police forces, because nobody wants to be sitting in their home and somebody break in and try to steal their stuff, right? And so finding that balance between just how much power and authority the government should have over us as individuals is exactly why I think America is still pretty darn young in setting up its governmental system, because we don't know, and that is something that we really struggle with trying to find an answer to. And got to be careful, because if we don't pay attention to governments, we don't pay attention to politics, we don't try to be active members of our society, then we very much could. This is the only doom and gloom I'm going to give you guys. Dun, dun, dun. We very much could wake up tomorrow and Big Brother have us all locked up. I mean, who saw the pandemic coming and everybody getting locked up, right? Now, here's a little side note on psychology. Now, think about what that meant. How quickly now, from a psychological, this is all psychology, guys. No personal opinion here, but the psychology of how the news can say we're under a pandemic. There's this disease. Everybody stay in your house for 2 years, and for the most part, most people complied that. Now, that definitely made the psychologists who involved in politics and government, that made their little pea brains go ding, 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 ding. Aha. This is really good data for us to figure out how we give the government more power and we get more control over people. I say that to say not everybody in politics and government is like that, but there is some psychology involved there. And when these events happen, and when things happen in politics, when world events and happen, just like there are military and political analysts who are over here, like compounding all that information and getting all that data, there are also psychologists and anthropologists and other human behavioralists who are documenting all that information too. And, they're doing it for, once again, all reasons. They're doing it for good reasons, they're doing it for the nefarious reasons, and, every other reason in between. And so, there we go. At the end of the day, when it comes to America, I like to say that, don't I? Or I've at least been saying it a lot in this lecture. And the main kind of political ideologies we see in our government right now are the four we have listed here. Yes, that's libertarian. The Tea Partiers there, guys. We got them too. And the main and then of these main ideologies, here's like a few key points of really what in spouses encompasses their political ideology. And what do we see? The commonalities, people's needs being met. We see resources, that's economics, division of labor, specialization, gender roles. And then, once again, we see the individual. Now, it's funny because socialism, once again, they make you think that if you get in socialism or something like communism, that there is no individual liberty, no social there. And not that it's so weird. I'm so fascinated with this. Like I said, I teach American history, or not American, I teach that too, but contemporary history, and we talk about the difference between these governments. That's as political as we get. And it just fascinates me because I really do take this anthropological view, and think about those stages of social cultural evolution in that. And I do see communism, what it was originally supposed to be, was this expanded tribalism, but it got turned into such a dictatorial, just a heinous thing, and pretty much everybody that enacted it. And it's kind of really tricky than to see socialism, which has taken, the best parts of communism and capitalism and turned it into a new form of government, how the individual plays in that. And I relate that directly back to the beginning of American government because these are all things that those dudes had to think about. They were, you know, burning the candle at both ends into the wee hours of the night, trying to figure out how to start this government. And I think that they gave us a really good, solid base for that. And like I said, we're just at a point in history to where still evolving and learning and growing. And that's a good thing because nothing can stay the same, nothing can stay stagnant. Life does not go that way. All right, and then just real quickly, and thinking about these different political ideologies, and we see, these main characteristics. That's what we'll call them there in that those last boxes at the end of the table there. Those are characteristics of those political ideologies. What's not addressed, we kind of touched a little bit on that idea of social liberty with socialism. Funny how we don't see that with conservatism instead of social liberty there with conservatism, we see more of an emphasis on economic liberty. So, money has been placed above the individual. That's kind of what it makes my mind think. And then the libertarians, they just want total economic and social liberty. You can't have that either. That's that's everybody just running amok, and there's got to be some kind of balance, some kind of regulation. So this week in our discussion, we're looking about at amendments that didn't get included. We're thinking about the amendments that did get included, and most specifically, we're really trying to put ourselves in the shoes of being the one who has to figure out how to do that whole process, figure out what rules are best for the greater good. And so in thinking about that too, we have to look at what isn't being addressed. And that's one of the great things we get to do this week. And so, once again, to bring this back around to social culture evolution, is that idea of linear. When we're stuck in this Cartesian kind of linear mindset of thinking, that's kind of changing too, and we see that it doesn't really represent all points on the spectrum. And so, you've got a grid, life is that's a great way to put it. Life it is more like a grid where we have all these different points that come together, right? And so when it comes to figuring out probably idea the most prudent political ideology, it's going to be one that encompasses this four-corner grid and also appeals to the others, so things like with the progressives. We haven't even talked about that because they're kind of new, but at the same time, and we will see that they have kind of always existed throughout history too. And then once again, us as the individual, for the most part, the majority of us are in the working class, right, guys? We're the working class heroes that really help to make the system run in one way or another. And so, how political ideology appeals to all of us. Where do we all fit on the grid? Because that grid is made up of different points, which means that we all have it's like the stars in the sky. We all have a little dot, but tracing, connecting the dots on how it all relates, that's definitely where things get tricky. And then once again, when we start looking at all the different institutions, political, social, religious, um, popular culture, media, we have to think about how those things influence politics too. And it's not new or novel that you have artists, musicians, actors, actresses, the celebrities who get on the bandwagon of political agendas. That has always happened. We've always seen that. Some of the best literature we have throughout history, it has to do with, things that were going on in society at that time. So they're political. I think of Dostoevsky and Crime and Punishment. It was his, pretty much talking about Russian government at that time, or like Voltaire criticizing, who was Voltaire? French. Voltaire criticizing, the French monarchy, which is what led to revolution and the beginning of the American government. So in thinking about that is basically caution, just like with all the rest of this, I think, we have to open ourselves up to looking at all points of view, even if we do not want to listen to it. We've got to open ourselves up to looking at all sides, all angles, and take it all with a grain of salt, because after it's the contemplative process, and this is the best way to educate. This is a good educational pedagogy, right? And the contemplative educate you find and learn the information, you think about the information, and then you figure out the way to integrate it into your life. And politics is definitely that way too. It's like we've got to figure out, the way that we can blend it all together in a way that, in a way that people can still be unhappy and miserable, but we have definitely found a way to come together, because once again, nobody is ever going to be happy, but there are definitely ways that we can all come together and figure out things that are going to work to the greater good. And making sure everybody has their basic needs met: food, water, shelter. And then I would add in, go up another level of that hierarchy and say, healthcare, education, and, self-esteem and a sense of belonging. And I do think that, is possible for, all people to find that. It might be a little impossible for governments to bring it all together. But like I said, it's not all doom and gloom, because life is a learning and growing process. And before all the craziness that seems to be going on in our political um, world, in the present world, it's just a part of it. And patience, time, working towards making those improvements, it will change. I'm sure some of you, I'm in my mid 40s. I'm sure those of you in class who are my age or older, we've already seen a lot of changes in society, good and bad. And what that means is that it's not stopped just because now in middle adulthood, it doesn't mean that things have stopped changing, and that things are not going to, and things are not going to not continue. Things will continue to change. That's what I'm trying to say there. And then, of course, we talked about this a little bit too, but that idea of, legitimizing yourself as a government means that you're just not working in isolation with the members of your society and your government. You have to, once again, we go back to that tribal kind of mentality. We have to work with the other families and the other groups of people that are out there. And, that's not always easy. And once again, because of history, because of colonialism, we look at countries and nations around the world and we see that, they too have challenges and finding a new way of government. And, a lot of those places were very much more impressed than the United States and certain groups. But then at the same time, a lot of people have been very oppressed in the United States. And so, the challenge, I think, the global challenge there is realizing that we're all human beings. We're all trying to work for the same thing. And, we've got to find some ways to come together and, not let those people that have negative, nefarious political agendas, you know, um, take all of our individual liberties away, be it we live here in the United States or in Kenya or in Guam or wherever, once again, we all have the right to be here because of the very fact that we are alive, and we all have the right to not have others harm us, and in that we're obligated to not harm others. So, in creating a perfect, oh no, scratch back up, Professor Moore. There's no such thing as perfect. We're never going to do that. But in trying to create a balanced society, there are going to be a lot of growing pains in that. And of course, go through, a class, we'll definitely talk about all of this even more. And I think we've already hit on these ideas. Is that they're definitely, our government has changed since the beginning, the founding fathers, right? And B, there are definitely things that can be improved upon. C, there are some scary factors there, because it does seem like in some ways we're kind of regressing and going back to monarchies, right? To where small groups have all the influence, the affluence in society, and therefore they get the cake, and the rest of us are stuck digging up the wild onions. That's a little reference to the French Revolution. And actually, Marie Antoinette never said let them have their cake. I can't remember how that came about, but that was once again, I heard it from a friend, you heard it from a friend type of thing, is how that came to be equated with her. And because of all of that, life does seem pretty doom and gloom right now. There's a lot of trust that has been shaken with our American government and our leaders in the past few years. And, once again, guys, it's not all doom and gloom. We always find a way forward. If you look back in history, the humans have always found a way forward, even in the most horrible, deplorable of situations. We find a way to come together and to move forward in positive, and I at least have hopes for our political spheres. All right, guys. So this is when we're finally, right. Let's take a break, and we will come back at your own leisure. Digest all of this we just talked about. I know is heavy. My brain hurts from talking about all of it, and so just come back and join me. And for the second part of the lecture, I'll try not to make it as long, and we'll just talk a little bit about the beginning of the American government. Thanks, guys.